Welcome to Commander Central, episode 206. Today, we'll be talking about the commanders specifically impacted by the new death trigger change. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, what's up? How's it going?
Pretty good. It's Friday afternoon once again.
Yes.
Beautiful weekend ahead of us, and, we have some interesting changes coming to our format with this rule change we're talking about.
We do. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. I think first we had a few Patreon supporters here we want to shout out.
Yeah, we want to say hello and thank you to the following new patron supporters, Christian Lombardo, Wubs, Brian McManus, and Jacob Greaser.
We want to thank them and want to thank anybody who supports the show, both through Patreon and through things like just liking and upvoting our show on YouTube and anywhere else you can do that. Makes a big difference for the metrics and makes a big difference for keeping the lights on. So we do really appreciate it, especially right now, given how crazy the world is around us. If you would like to reach out and say hi, how would you do that, Max?
You can hit us up on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can also Facebook us, CMDR Central. And you can email us at cmdrcentral@gmail.com.
And as we already mentioned, you can find us on patreon.com.
Patreon.com/CMDR Central. Go check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play series. And if you are able to financially support us, we always appreciate that. And it helps keeps the lights on and buys me pants.
We do. We do. And pants are very useful.
Except in the summer. No pants in the summer.
I'm with you there. We actually got a chance to play a few games. Any interesting ones worth mentioning, Max?
Well, I believe we are recording this after the Command Fest online happened, so that was last weekend. Time is still just a blur to me, everybody, in quarantine. So I got to play a couple games during Command Fest online. I played one in the morning. Unfortunately, I had some stuff going on during the day, so my schedule was kind of here and there for the event. I got one good game in the morning that lasted 2.5 hours. And then I got another good game in the afternoon with Jermoka that lasted close to 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
It was a fun, grindy game, answers everywhere. So it was one of those games where it wasn't someone taking long turns or anything. It was just, there were answers for everything that hit the board, and it was a great game of Magic.
I've gotten to fire off my Athreos Pestilence deck a couple times now. I played it on stream on the EDH Recast Twitch stream on Wednesday night. It was the three of us, and Lady Danger was our guest. She was a lot of fun to play with. And I won the game with the deck. The problem, such as it is, was it was really grindy and really controlly. Because when you get a Pestilence out, you kill all the creatures. And just the way it was working for me, I actually didn't even have Pestilence out. I had Withering Wisps out for majority of it because somebody blew it up and I recurred it with, I think, Hall of Helios Generosity. And then I recurred it with Savin's Reclamation twice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was, which then keeps people from playing creatures or kills their creatures. Like they would kill it and they'd start replaying stuff. And I'd recur it and kill all the creatures again. But it's also limited to how much mana you can pump into it by the number of snowlands you have out. So it wasn't like I could use like 9 mana a turn and clock everybody. I was limited to doing like 3 or 4. So it just took forever to get the kill, and then it just made everything like not the most fun experience. So I need to figure out a way to wrap up games a little bit faster once I get to that point.
I have a suggestion.
What's that?
There's this cool 2-card combo called Blood Bond that would probably go great in that deck.
I do have Exquisite Blood in there already. I don't know. Well, so here's one thing, actually, too, I realized. It's one of those things, particularly when you're playing with obscure cards. Withering Wisps is a Pestilence variant, and it just reads, spend a black, Withering Wisps deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. Activate this ability no more times than the number of snow swamps you control. So that's also, I think I was also playing it slightly incorrectly. So I'd look down and be like, okay, I have, 5 snow swamps because I had Urborg out and a couple snow plains, so I had 5, so I could put 5 into it. And you don't have to tap those, you can't exceed the amount of snow swamps you control. So I could use any black mana I had. So I would do that, and I would still have multiple lands left, but I'm like, well, I can only do 5. Forgetting that that's only per turn. When I pass a turn to the next player, then it's the same thing happens again. I can spend mana, but I can't exceed the amount of snow swamps I control. So actually, I probably could have sped that game up. I just was kind of reading Withering Wisps wrong, which is what happens when you're dealing with a card from Ice Age that nobody plays. So anyway, I probably could have sped things up a little bit. And I think I'll just probably, by the time I tweak the deck over the course of the next few months, I will hopefully find workarounds and speed it up a little bit too. And maybe that was just a fluke game, because like at one point, right before my turn, Joey blew up my black market that had like 12 counters on it, and I would have just killed everybody with black market that turn too. So there was some luck that sped it up or slowed it down, so I'm not too worried about it. I was relatively happy with the deck besides that. So that always feels good when you build a new deck and it plays and kind of does what you want it to do. We have a couple of announcements from the show here first before we get into kind of Magic at Large announcements. We'll have a fun Patreon reward coming out for any subs that are $2 and up. The art is done for that, but we still need some other work done. Then we need to get those things printed out as well, so we're not going to give the full specifics until we actually have a date about when we're going to get this product in. We just kind of wanted to tease it a little bit because we're actually super excited about it. We teased the art out in our Slack last week, and Max's they all look good, but Max's, yours is undoubtedly my favorite.
Well, thank you. I think yours is really cool. These are awesome pieces of art. I can't wait to get them for the project we're working on, and just, maybe some bigger prints to hang up here in the Dungeon of Doom. My
wife liked Chris's the most.
Oh, okay. That's cool. This is really cool, though.
Yeah. And speaking of Chris, we kind of narrowed down a few things about what we can do to get him back on the show, too, technologically speaking. So hopefully in the next couple weeks, we don't know exactly what show that will be, but I would guess no later than probably mid-July. He should be back on, hopefully, most shows moving forward.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think, probably aiming sometime after the 4th.
Yeah, I would think so.
After that holiday weekend.
Yeah. So there's a few tech things on our end we need to take care of. We're actually going to go to his place and help him get a setup going where he can record remotely. So hopefully in the fairly near future, definitely in the fairly near future, hopefully sooner rather than later, he'll be back on the show as well. So if you've been missing his laugh, it should be back coming up. We also had some news from the Commander's Rule Committee, and this was in response to WotC actually banning a couple of cards for art reasons based on them being offensive. So the quote from the Rules Committee says, effective June 10th, 2020, Wizards of the Coast is removing 7 cards from all their constructed formats. We support the message they are sending through this action and stand with them in attempts to foster a more inclusive and positive culture. We will be following suit in Commander. So the 7 cards they removed from constructed formats are also being banned effectively in our format in EDH. Invoke Prejudice, which is in 226 decks in EDH Rec. Cleanse, which is in 18. Stone Throwing Devils in 12. Pradesh Gypsies in 1. Jihad in 19. Imprison in 12. And Crusade in 880. I've never even ran any of those cards in a deck. Have you, Max?
I have not at all.
I don't know if I've ever seen any of them even be cast in anyone else's deck. So, statistically speaking, really, Crusade is the only one that kind of matters in terms of people running it, because it was an 880 decks. But that one, there's a absolute ton of, semi-identical replacements, if not ones that are actually better. I think Honor of the Pure is actually literally better because it doesn't buff your opponent's creatures. But there's Dictator Heliod, there's Always Watching, there's Commander's Insignia, there's Force of Virtue, Glorious Anthem, Spear of Heliod. There's literally a dozen replacements for it, so that one I would imagine shouldn't be too big of a deal. And really, same thing in other formats. Those cards didn't see that much play either, maybe in Old School, but that's not even that huge of a format, so it was worth mentioning because a few of those cards did get banned.
Yep, totally.
Okay, so let's jump into our main topic here. We want to talk about the new rule change that was announced at Command Fest. It doesn't technically go into place until the change with Core 2021. People actually have been playing it already. We played the EDH Recast stream on Wednesday night. We played with it like it was already in effect.
Joey just couldn't wait that long.
He couldn't. That's basically what it was. Yes, he just couldn't wait. And to a degree, people have always been kind of doing that incorrectly a little bit anyway, so it's a relatively easy and logical change. First things first, I recorded a short conversation with Level 3 Judge and CAG member Charlotte Sable to talk about the specifics of this from someone who both understands the mechanism of the change and who is actually a judge and can speak to things from that point of view. And she was also somebody who, at least kind of metaphorically speaking, was in the room when the change was debated, since she's on the CAG. So we'll cut to that segment right now. I would like to welcome Level 3 Judge, CAG member, and a 2-time previous guest, Charlotte Sable, back to the show. Charlotte, how's it going?
Going good. Interesting times.
That's a really polite way to phrase it. It is indeed interesting times. I think that's an old proverb that you live in interesting times, and I don't think it's meant in a positive way necessarily. Yeah. But we're surviving, which I guess is all you can hope for sometimes. Before we jump into this, how did your Command Fest online experience go?
Good. It was a lot of fun. I got to play with some interesting people. It wasn't so easy to... I wish there'd been a better system. Like, as one of the team leaders, I wish there'd been a better system for people to sort of queue up to play with me. But beyond that, it was, it was what it was. But it's fine. I played probably about 5 games over the course of the day and took some breaks and did the one panel. And it was a lot of fun. And I had a really good time and everyone seemed to enjoy it. And Spell Table held up, which was great. And
Yeah, I was really happy with Spell Table. It's been a really good format for playing these games. And I missed the panels, too. There was a couple different ones, and it was just a situation where, like, I was in a game and I'm looking at the clock, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to bail in the game. So I didn't even get to see those, whereas if you're at an actual Magic Fest, usually you can kind of, across the room see, like, something's happening, and it's a little bit easier just to, like, wrap things up and walk over to watch a panel, whereas online it just didn't kind of have that vibe. So I wound up missing them. But were you on the one where they actually did this rule reveal?
No, that was just the RC. I was on the deck building panel, which was before the previous game.
Okay.
There, which is good. So it was me and Eric Levine and Pleasant Kenobi, and we just chatted for about half an hour about how we go about building decks and choosing commanders and that sort of thing. And it was interesting and a good time. I'm sure the VOD will go up somewhere, I hope.
Okay.
But,
if it's up when the show goes live, we'll try to get a link out there when we release. That's always a fascinating thing to talk about, too, because people take very, very different approaches when it comes to building their actual deck. So I find it really interesting to hear how somebody else does it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we mentioned a rule change here. At the Command Fest Online, we found out that there will be a rule change. As of the Core Set 2021 rules update, we'll see the following change. If a commander is in a graveyard or in exile, and that card was put into that zone since the last time state-based actions were checked, its owner may put it into the command zone. So in non-judge language, can you just explain briefly what that change is going to mean here?
So previously, anytime your commander would leave the battlefield to go to a different zone, you had the option to put it back in the command zone instead of going to that other zone. So that meant it wouldn't go to the graveyard, wouldn't go to exile, wouldn't go to hand, wouldn't go into your library. And thus, anything that would trigger off of it moving to those places, be it its own ability or something else's ability, wouldn't trigger. Now, the replacement effect is still in place for if your commander would go to your hand or to your library, because those are hidden zones and fishing cards out of those is doable, but a little awkward under the rules.
Sure.
But instead, now commanders will just die and go to your graveyard, or they'll just be exiled and go to exile, and then separately, the next time state-based actions would be checked, which is when the next time a player would get priority, the owner of the commander will get to choose to put it back in the command zone. But that choice only happens once. It's basically use it or lose it. It's a one-time thing.
The really visible example of this that I always think of is Alenda the Dusk Rose. Yeah. Particularly because it's a commander, it's a pretty neat and interesting commander. It's relatively new. When Alenda dies, create X/1/1 white vampire creature tokens with a lifelink, where X is Alenda's power. The problem in the past was always, well, you've had to let Alenda die and go into the graveyard, which then makes it difficult to recast her. You have to, either exile her from the graveyard in some way or form, or reanimate her or whatever, but she had to actually go in the yard. You couldn't bring her back to the command zone. Mm-hmm. Whereas now you will still get that trigger and she can go back to the command zone, making it much easier to play that deck.
Yeah, absolutely. You now don't have to run things like Scrabbling Claws or,
right.
Relic of Progenitus or whatever to fish her out of your own graveyard.
Although I've played against multiple Alenda decks, and she was a pretty effective commander, even with having to have all those workarounds.
Well, I mean, again, also you might just want to straight reanimate her instead. So, like, instead of running those cards, just run a reanimation spell and,
right. Are there any other particular examples of things that this is going to affect in the game that are worth talking about here?
Yeah, there's quite a few, actually. So one of the easiest ones, and one of the things where the current rule comes up the most, is in the case of, a Blood Artist sort of trigger. if someone, say, board wipes and there's a Blood Artist or a Zulaport Cutthroat or something on the battlefield, a lot of times it'll be, okay, how many creatures died? Okay, it was 10. I gained 10. Wait, no, it was 2 of those were commanders. Okay, I only gained 8, sort of thing, right? Like
that's how that conversation goes every time.
Yeah.
right. Like people always have to like go back and like verify it because the rule is so kind of strange.
Yeah. Whereas now it's just, okay, 10 things died, 10 triggers died, That's like, again, where the idea with this change is to make it play just as normally as possible. Because of this, though, there are a couple of ways that people could get your commander before no longer work. So It That Betrays has a trigger that says whenever an opponent sacrifices a permanent, you put that permanent into play under your control. And so previously, even if you sent your commander to the command zone, it was still sacrificed, and It That Betrays would bring it back for It That Betrays' controller, right? But now, because you sacrifice your commander to the graveyard, and you'll have priority state-based actions will happen before the trigger goes on the stack, you'll be able to move your commander out of your graveyard, and since it's changed zones, since it was sacrificed, It That Betrays won't be able to find it anymore.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't even thought about that one. Yeah, that makes sense, though.
Yep. So that's one change. However, some things will now be able to actually get your commander that couldn't in the past. So it's only a very narrow set. Basically, it has to both kill the creature and bring it back, or exile it and bring it back in the same spell or ability resolving. So there's a spell called Necromantic Selection that destroys all creatures, and then you get to reanimate one of them as a black zombie, right? And so now that can steal someone's commander, because state-based actions won't happen until after the spell is finished resolving, at which point the creature's no longer in the graveyard.
That makes sense, too, and that's probably a really easy one to miss, because people are probably playing that card, and they've gotten so used to not being able to get a commander.
Yeah.
That's an easy one to gloss over.
Yeah, it's fine. There's also Sauron, Lord of Innistrad's Ultimate also has a similar effect where you can destroy up to 3 creatures or planeswalkers and bring one of them back under your control. But note that it doesn't work with things that are triggers or return things later in the turn sort of thing. Like a slow blink won't let someone keep your commander. If someone takes temporary control of your creature and does like an a blink and return at end of turn thing, that won't work.
Okay.
Because you'll have priority in between. But an immediate blink, like Conjurer's Closet, which is end step, you target a creature you control and then exile it and return it immediately under your control. And so that would make any sort of temporary control change permanent on it. That'll work to keep someone's commander because it's all at once. Basically. But it's not all downside. I mean, honestly, this just makes commanders be treated more like normal creatures, right?
Sure.
But one loophole that this really does close, which is really good, is the Banishing Light loophole.
Right.
Where previously, with Banishing Light, Banishing Light basically exiles a non-land permanent until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. And so if you sent your commander to the command zone, Banishing Light would still be able to pull it back into play if it left the battlefield later, assuming your commander hadn't left the command zone in the interim, right? But now that won't happen, because if you send your commander back to the command zone, it has left exile and Banishing Light can no longer find it. You can leave it in exile, and then, if you have the ability to remove the Banishing Light, and then your commander will come back, but then you won't be able to cast it because it's not in the command zone. So there's a trade-off. Once again, though, it's just treating it more like a normal creature again. There's ups and downs with this change, but for the most part, it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, the Banishing Light one is such a weird rule that having that no longer be a thing you have to explain to people is really nice.
Exactly. Plus, it's not a thing anymore, so don't worry about it. Also, we don't have to deal with the weird situation where your commander's part of a mutate stack now, and the rest of the stack goes to the graveyard, but your commander goes to the command zone, and which is a whole other thing, but
right.
But just to be fair, we knew that this change was happening before Ikoria was released. And so that whole ruling was literally just a piece of duct tape over the rules until this rule change came through. So it was never meant to be, a solid, firm rule. It was just, this is good enough for 3 months sort of thing.
Was this particular change something that was suggested to the Rules Committee by the CAG, or was it just something that's always been wanting to be changed?
It's something that the Rules Committee brought up to the CAG, but it's definitely something that's been on people's minds for a while. And we sort of just bandied back and forth, starting in October, November, we sort of bandied back and forth ideas and finally came across this solution, which works really well, which borrows a lot of tech from the Death Touch state-based action, actually. So
okay.
That's actually another thing, though, a good way to educate people, because the way Death Touch works, you only check for if something has taken damage from a source with Death Touch the first time after the damage is dealt, and after that, Death Touch sort of loses its sting. So it only really matters, though, if a creature loses Indestructible.
Sure.
So, for example, if my Death Touch creature blocks your Indestructible creature, right, like my 1/1 Death Touch the rat blocks your, 3/3 Indestructible. And then later in the turn, I activate Shadow Spear, which removes the Indestructible. Your creature won't now die. It still has a damage marked on it, but the Death Touch marker has been used up. It's no longer relevant.
That makes sense. And I can't think of a situation where that's ever popped up.
Yeah.
But that does completely make sense, and it is
because it's a big memory issue, right?
Sure.
It's easy enough to remember, okay, this took whatever amount of damage, but a lot of times you won't remember, especially if there's a big combat and then later stuff happens, you wouldn't necessarily remember, wait, which one did the Death Touch creature block, sort of thing. And so we borrowed the wording from that state-based action to make this one more clean and not have to use counters or other things, because one of the previous suggestions was something like this, except instead of it just being a one-time trigger, you would either put it in the command zone or put a choice counter or something like that on it, which is a little bit clunky. But
were there any counter arguments really made against doing this change?
Not really. I mean, there are people that wanted slightly different things. I mean, no one was particular. I mean, honestly, I don't think anyone in the CAG would have really cried if we hadn't changed anything.
Sure.
And probably not the RC either. This was more something that people wanted, and, we were on board with changing, and Wizards wanted it as well, so that they could, design more commanders with death triggers.
Sure.
Since in the past they haven't really been able to, because in the era of Commander, there's only been 3 or 4 with death triggers, right? And there's always complaints about them when they come out, because it's oh yeah, right, that doesn't work quite right, like Rolesk or Elenda or a few others.
Gerard, I guess, but he is kind of a
Gerard has the special thing baked in. Yeah. Oh. One thing that actually is important to note, this rules change does break some of the functionality of Rayhan, Last of the Abzan.
Joey was talking about that when we streamed the other night.
So yeah, because the way she's worded is if when creature dies what's the word? It's dies or was put in the command zone, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
So previously it would be if your commander is being pathed or whatever, now you just put it directly in the command zone and the ability would trigger and it's fine. But now your commander goes to the command zone, or goes to exile and then the command zone, and now doesn't quite work that way. But at the same time, it's the same as any other creature getting exiled. It won't trigger it, so it's really not that super special.
Sure. Last thing I'll ask, and this is from you personally, I'm not asking for any behind-the-scenes discussion with the CAG or anything. Mm-hmm. Are there any rules, tweaks, or changes like this that you yourself would like to see happen down the road?
Again, nothing super on board. I'd like to see something change in Commander about companions, because I don't think that the current status quo really serves the format particularly well. Be it either just removing them from the format altogether, which I think would be fine and would let, Lutri free, or changing them to be more usable in that either we sort of, either reverting them to printed functionality so that they don't cost 3 extra and you can cast them directly from outside the game, or even just leave the change so that you pay 3 to put them in your hand, but you can build your deck, but you can exclude your commander or commanders from the requirement when you build your deck, sort of thing. which is an idea someone floated because the CAG meeting is this, CAG RC meeting is this Saturday, and someone floated that idea to me, and thinking about it makes a lot of sense. Would allow more open things, would allow Lurrus to actually be used, that sort of thing, right?
Well, Max will be happy to hear that, because when we recorded our segment for the Commander Summit for Command Zone, we commented on the changes and how badly they have hampered partners in Commander, although they make sense elsewhere.
Yeah.
And he mentioned basically the same thing you just said, so he'll be glad to hear that you are on the same page with him.
I'm not 100% which side I'm on, but I certainly am against the status quo, but I'm not sure which way I'd rather see it flip. Right.
All right, excellent. Well, Charlotte, thank you very much for joining us again. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. You clarified a lot of this for us, and I am sure we will have you back on again to talk about these kind of crazy rule changes or just Commander in general. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. No, always a pleasure. And
Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you?
Sure. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at JQLGirl. And other than that, you can find my blog at magicjudge.tumblr.com. And everyone out there, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep fighting the good fight.
Excellent. We just want to say thank you again to Charlotte for that. She brings a lot of experience and perspective to the format, and we appreciate her sharing her time with us and with you.
Yes, thank you again, Charlotte, for sitting down with Dana and having that discussion about the rule change.
Max, let's talk about what commanders get most affected by this change. I'll note here there are quite a few commanders that already worked around this, so nothing will change for them. One of the most recent ones, Gerard Weatherlight Hero, the way his card is worded, he self-exiles after dying, so when he dies, then it just says you exile him, so then you can bring him back to the command zone and still get the trigger effectively. So he was already kind of built with that in mind. The God Eternal Cycle from War of the Spark was worded that if it dies or was exiled, you could put it into your library, so that didn't really care if you let it go to the graveyard as well. You could still then get that trigger off them. There's multiple Kamigawa legends that let you do the exile effect after they die as well, so same thing there. They already kind of worked with a death trigger just due to, either intentional wording, like the War of the Spark ones, I would imagine, or accidental wording in the case of Kamigawa. So nothing really changes for them, even though they do have death triggers. But there are quite a few that do matter, so let's just go over them and talk about what impact this is going to have on those cards. So I will start with the first one here, Anax Hardened in the Forge, and the specific important wording here is whenever Anax or another non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 red satyr creature token. So, previously, Anax, when he died, you would use the replacement effect, probably. Maybe you put it in your graveyard, but more often than not, that was probably just being sent back to your command zone, therefore you didn't make a token. Even though it says when Anax or another non-token creature you control dies, you're not getting a death because you are returning it to the command zone. Well, that's no longer the case. So if you are playing an Anax deck, you are going to get a token when someone kills your commander. And that wasn't true before. Not really going to change how the commander plays, but it's a nice little bonus if you happen to be playing Anax.
Yeah, for sure. The next one we have comes all the way from Legends. Axelrod Gunnerson. He reads, whenever a creature dealt damage by Axelrod this turn dies, you gain 1 life and Axelrod deals 1 damage to target player planeswalker.
So this was mostly relevant for opponents' commanders.
Right. So, you hit something for 1, you ended up killing it somehow, you're going to get that trigger, which is great on opponents' commanders.
For all, dozen people playing Axelrod Gunnerson. Next up, Baron Sengir, another old card from way back in the day. Whenever a creature is put in the graveyard, the same turn Baron Sengir damaged it, put a +2/+2 counter on Baron Sengir. So +2/+2 counter, that's was a thing back then.
Oh, bring them back. Bring them back.
Again, similar to Axelrod, and we'll probably be repeating this as we move forward quite a few times. This is mostly relevant for opponents' commanders when they happen to block the Baron. In the past, that was a replacement effect where they got returned to the command zone, so they didn't technically die and you didn't get the counter. Now you do. So that's going to be what a lot of these are, but, if you're playing Baron Sengir, it does make a difference because you're probably pretty routinely seeing commanders in play and seeing them block Baron or something. So, that's relevant, but that's your deck.
Coming up next, a very recent printing, Chevelle Bane of Monsters from Ikoria. This is the one that puts the bounty counters on an opponent's permanent. And so again, this is just, you can put that bounty counter on your opponent's commander to get the trigger to gain the life and draw a card when it dies.
Now, with Axelrod and Baron, which no one's probably really playing those anyway, that's much more corner case. You have to hope someone's commander blocks your creature or whatever. In the case of Chevelle, or Cheville, however you say it, being able to put that bounty counter on someone's commander is very, very relevant. That's many times going to be the thing you want to kill and have go away. So this one, while it's effectively the same thing as Axelrod and Baron, is probably much more relevant because you are going to be actually gunning for those commanders in a way you really weren't with those other two cards. Although Chevelle is relatively new and probably a not very good commander anyway, but I mean, it does make a difference there. Next, we have one of the more relevant ones here, Child of Alura. When Child of Alura dies, destroy all non-land permanents and they can't be regenerated. You know, you had to literally let Child of Alura die and go sit in your graveyard. And then if you wanted to recast it, you had to run ways, Scrabble and Claws, exile it from your graveyard, or flat out just exiling your whole graveyard, or maybe reanimating it, whatever. You had to do something like that to get it back into play. Now you do not. Now Child of Alura just goes back to your command zone, you still get the trigger, and you can recast it again. So this one's really, really important if you have a Child of Alura deck.
This is, out of every commander that's probably impacted by this change, this is the one I'm worried about the most. That people are going to start bringing these out in the wild. It's a 5-color commander, 5-color board wipe, essentially.
Yep.
So this is the one, once we can start playing again in person and out in the wild, I would expect to see an increase in Child of Alura decks.
Yes, I would think that's very possible. The only thing I would say is it's kind of a trolly deck, or if not trolly, really one that people maybe don't like to see. And I feel like if you didn't care about that, you were maybe already playing it, and this isn't going to change a lot of minds. People aren't like, I wouldn't have built it before, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if I'll see too many more of these, but definitely way more viable and significantly stronger than it was.
Yeah.
The same is true with our next commander. What do we have next, Max?
Our next one is Elenda the Dusk Rose. This was from Rivals of Ixalan. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda, so that means your opponent's commanders. But then when Elenda dies, you create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elenda's power. So we've done a couple deck techs on Elendas in the past. A lot of those decks used to have a lot of recursion in them just because you got to get Elenda into the graveyard to get the tokens.
Right.
So, that changes a lot. I'm sure they'll still run some reanimation packages, but I think you can back off a little on how many you probably needed in the first place.
Yeah, Elenda was, like you said, I've lost to Elenda decks multiple times. We had a listener, and I apologize, I've forgotten his name, who came to visit actually last summer, probably roughly around this time, in our shop to play a few games who had an Elenda deck that was quite good. And it's just now gotten that much better. And not only does the commander get better, it's that you now free up how many slots in that deck, taking out those kind of Scrabble and Claws kind of effects, or taking out those reanimation effects maybe. So the commander, first of all, gets easier to use. Secondly, you free up 6, 8, 10, 12 slots sometimes for things we're using for enablers. That's, I think, probably the most important part here. And Elenda was already in 400 plus decks, and the price is not very friendly right now. I think it's like a $25 card. But I would imagine if any of these, I think we see more play, it will be Elenda for sure.
Okay.
It's a good card, and it doesn't have that this is going to be annoying to deal with thing like Child of Alura might have. So yeah, this one I think has some definite upside to it. Next, we have a Garza Zol Plague Queen from way back in Cold Snap. Flying in haste. Whenever a creature is dealt damage by Garza Zol Plague Queen, this turn, put a +1 counter on Garza Zol. So again, very similar to Baron Sangir. Instead of getting +2/+2 counters, it gets a +1/+1, but wouldn't trigger off someone's commander, and it does now.
Next on the list is Dana's favorite, Glissa the Traitor. Whenever a creature an opponent control dies, you can recur an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. So just benefiting off your opponent's commanders. Great. I just can't wait to play against this deck now.
Just more triggers for me to miss. Yeah, and a lot of these, like we said, are going to be these kind of triggers, and Glissa is definitely one. This is also, I don't think this is the kind of change that will make people start building Glissa decks like I think it maybe will with Elenda, but it does make it easier. There's a lot of times you see a board wipe. I think actually the last time I played this deck was I think I played it on the Magic Fest Online in one of the games, and there was one time when there was like the creatures in play, I got to recur one artifact off a board wipe because it killed 3 commanders and 1 creature. So 4 creatures died and I got 1 recursion because the other 3 were all commanders. Well, now I would have gotten 4 triggers off of that. So I don't think it really changes how you play Glissa, but it's going to be better, I think, because of it. Next, we have Hakon Stromgald Scourge. This one's kind of funny because where it's relevant here is it says, when Hakon is put into a graveyard from play, you lose 2 life. However, you were already doing that for the most part because Hakon doesn't allow itself to be played from anywhere but your graveyard. So people, when they got Hakon in play and it died, it was always going to the graveyard anyway, because that's the only place they can recast it for the most part. So, I mean, I guess technically once in a while they would let it go back to the command zone, but 99.9% of the time it was going to the graveyard anyway. So technically this changes how Hakon works, but functionally it doesn't because nobody let it go back to the command zone when it was out anyway. So that one I almost didn't include, but I'm like, it's just such a weird thing that like it technically makes a change, but you're never going to see the change because no one does it was amusing. So that's why that one's in there. What's next, Max?
The next is He Who Hungers from one of the Kamigawas. It has flying and 1 sacrifice a spirit. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. Choose a card. From it, that player discards that card. Play this ability only time you could play a sorcery. But I think where this comes in handy is the Soul Shift ability. And it has Soul Shift 4 for when this creature dies, you may return target spirit card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to hand. This definitely means it hits the graveyard and then you can put it back in the command zone. So this is one of those that definitely benefit from the rule change.
Yep, this was another one where you definitely had to have ways then to recur it from your graveyard or exile it from the yard once you use the Soul Shift, and now you can just use the Soul Shift. I'm not sure if anyone's going to start building this because of that, but it definitely got way more usable. Again, you're not going to have to spend all those slots, and that makes it so much easier to play. Judith the Scourge Diva. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. Judith is a non-token creature and she will now die. So it's relevant in that she will now cause her ability to trigger in a way she didn't before.
Yep.
I mean, I guess she could before if you want her to go to the graveyard, but like the odds of you ever doing that were pretty slim. Now you can just let her go to the graveyard, get a bonus damage, and then return her back to the command zone. It's a small change, but it's like a free damage you're now going to get off Judith dying that you didn't get in the past.
So I'm going to lump the following 5 into 1. It's the 5 legendary Kamigawa dragons, Jugen, Kaiga, Kikushiko, Ryus, and the white one. Yosei. There we go.
Yep.
So all of these had a dies trigger on them.
Yep.
You know, the +1/+1 counters, gain control of a creature. Kikushiko, of course, has his everybody lose 5 life, you gain that much life. These just get better because you don't need to recur them in any way.
Yeah, significantly better. And I'm curious to see, too. I don't think they will ban Kikushiko, but I think that was probably one of the reasons it was a safe unban when it was unbanned 5 years ago, whatever it was because you had to still do that dance to work around reanimating it or exiling it. Now you don't. Now it just comes into play. You can immediately sack it, send it back to the command zone, immediately sack it. So I'll be curious to see if Kikushiko particularly, I don't think it's bannable. It's not that strong, but that's annoying and that's going to make people want to, but it's a much better commander for sure. Up next, we have one of the newest ones here from Commander 2020, Kelsian the Plague. One of the relevant portions here is you can tap Kelsey to deal 1 damage to target creature you don't control. When that creature dies, you get an experience counter. And Kelsey, of course, gets +1/+1 for each experience counter you have. Kind of similar to Chevelle earlier, this now triggers when you kill someone's commander, and that's particularly relevant because pretty often the commander is going to be the best target for you or the target you want to hit. Well, previously, Kelsian wouldn't have gotten that experience counter off killing a commander, and now it does.
Very nice. The next one is Kodama of the Center Tree. This is another legendary spirit from one of the Kamigawa sets. It has Soul Shift X, so similar to He Who Hungers. When it dies, you get to Soul Shift and actually get those spirits back.
Yeah, probably not relevant enough to change people playing what's not a great commander, but...
Mono green spirits, Dana, come on. Switch Reki up, you got this. If anyone can do it, you can.
I should have looked out of curiosity to see how many green spirits there are. There's definitely a couple. I know Orchard Spirits one, but man, there's not many. Speaking of commanders that are relevant to me, Kresh the Bloodbraided. Whenever another creature dies, you may put X +1 counters on Kresh, where X is that creature's power. Formerly did not trigger off commanders, now it does, and that's going to be pretty big. there's a lot of times that I look around the table and I'm like, I'm going to get nothing off this thing I want to do because there's only one, Leno or Elf in play. The rest are all commanders. Getting that power and toughness off commanders is going to be big, really, really big in some cases where you have some decks where their commander gets huge. It gives me a chance to then take those put counters on Crash based on the commander dying that I just didn't get a chance to do before. So that one is enough to make people start building Crash. It was already in 486 decks, so people were already playing it. I don't think it's going to probably change anything. It's kind of a quality of life change mostly. It just makes Crash better based on, what frequently happens in games.
So next, another fairly recent printing from War of the Spark is Massacre Girl. When Massacre Girl enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And then when a creature dies this turn, each other creature, then Massacre Girl, gets -1/-1 again until end of turn. So, if you have a way to pick off someone's commander, it benefits from that again.
Yeah, in the past, that could kind of end the chain when you start killing commanders because you're not getting the other +1 counter. Now you do. So that's, I think, kind of a big deal for Massacre Girl. Similarly to Chevelle, who we talked about earlier, we have Mathis Fiendseeker. You put a bounty counter on target creature an opponent controls, and when this creature dies, each opponent draws a card and gains 2 life. Didn't really work well on commanders before because they didn't die. They often used a replacement effect, went to the command zone. Now it does. So not enough to make Mathis probably start getting played heavily. But it is in 600 and some decks, so I guess I shouldn't say anything too bad about it. That's a good amount. But it's a quality of life change for sure. Being able to generate that card draw off someone else's commander is really, really useful. So that is a definite bump for Mathis also.
Next we have Obnix Unshackled. This was from Core Set 15. He has one of his multiple lines of text says, whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on him. He will just get swole easier now.
Yep, probably not going to buff up him as a commander necessarily, but I think he's a pretty good card in some 99s, so that's probably where it's more relevant than people start being like, oh, I'm going to start playing him as a commander. He's not getting that, compared to your other mono-black options, I don't know if he helps that much, but in the 99, that one's going to be pretty relevant because he does see some play there. Omnath, Locus of Rage. Whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Now you get a trigger off Omnath dying. It's just a free lightning bolt a couple times a game. That's not bad.
You know what? Sometimes that used to be, the single lightning bolt you need to finish off a player, and you're like, oh, if I do this, I have, one last player to get rid of. Well, who cares? You put it in the yard, you dome one person to get him out of the game, you recast Omnath right away because you're in Gruul and you have all the mana.
Exactly. Yep, that's a good change for Omnath, makes it slightly better, so good to see.
Next up is Rolesque Apex Hybrid. We did a deck tech on this back in the day, I guess I can say now.
Yeah, that's probably about a year ago.
Obviously, when Rolesque dies, you proliferate, then proliferate again. So now you don't have to bake in a bunch of recursion like we did on that live deck build.
Yeah, that was one of those very much like a Lenda where you have a bunch of slots dedicated to doing something with Rolesque after it goes to the graveyard because you want those triggers. You're freeing up so much open space. This is another one that I think people will start building now. It's a solid commander to begin with, and the fact that it's going to free up 8, 10, 12 slots in that deck, I think makes it way more interesting.
Get ready for my Super Friends deck, everybody.
Are you going to do one?
No, God, no.
Up next, we have Sir Conrad the Grim. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. Triggers off commanders again, which is a pretty big deal. Conrad is already in 643 decks, and that's a relatively new commander, so I don't know if people will build more Conrad decks just as a result of this, but it got a little bit stronger. And it's already pretty strong.
Joy. I just can't wait to play against more Sir Conrad decks, or just see more of him. Next up is Toshiro Umezawa from, again, one of the Kamigawa blocks. Whenever a creature an opponent controls is put into the graveyard from play, you may play target instant card in your graveyard, and then if that card were to be put anywhere besides the graveyard, it gets exiled. So just a cool black Spellslinger commander that kind of finally works a little better.
Yep. Tuk Tuk the Explorer. When Tuk Tuk dies, create a legendary 5/5 colorless goblin golem artifact creature token named Tuk Tuk the Returned. So you had to let your commander die to get the 5/5 golem. The problem there being red doesn't have much reanimation, so you're stuck dealing for the most part with like artifact exile to knock Tuk-Tuk out of the graveyard. And there's, a few of those. We've mentioned Scrabbling Claws. There's any of the things like Relic Progenitus, multiple effects to do that, but you had to run quite a few to feel like you could consistently recur your commander. You don't even need to care about those anymore. I don't know if having a commander that makes a 5/5, a vanilla 5/5 is that big of a deal, but if you're just wanting to build Tuk-Tuk for whatever reason, it got significantly better, for sure.
Next up is Yahenni Undying Partisan, all the way from Aether Revolt. Like some other generals on this list, it just gets bigger when opponents' creatures die, so the commanders just make them get bigger now.
And last but not least, Zergo Helms Smasher. Similar effect to things like Baron Sengir we talked about earlier. Whenever a creature dealt damage by Zergo Helms Tracker this turn dies, put a +1 counter on a Zergo Helm Smasher. Didn't trigger off commanders, does now. So makes Zergo just a little bit better, a little bit easier to put counters on him when someone blocks with your commander, or, you block their commander swinging in somehow. Just a little bit of an improvement for Zergo. So those are all the commanders that changed here functionally. That's going to change mostly when they are in the zone, but some of those triggered abilities matter when they're in the 99 too, so that does make a difference for some of those decks. Is there anything that you, from this, that's going to change what you're doing, Max, at all? Like, would you want to build any of these now that you wouldn't before, or is it just going to mostly be something to keep an eye on when you play against those decks?
Nothing specifically I want to build due to this. I mean, Rolesk would be fun.
Yeah.
Just because it is a really cool effect of that double proliferate when it hits the graveyard. But no, nothing specifically makes me want to build something. It just means we gotta maybe pay a little more attention. So like I know in my Regna and Krav deck, I'm gonna have some extra Blood Artist triggers when other people's commanders die. What I found interesting in that conversation with Charlotte was that this rule change actually closes that Banishing Light loophole that used to exist. I found that very interesting when I was listening to the interview prior to us talking today. So that'll be kind of nice to remember because, does it work with Banishing Light or does it the Oblivion Ring? And it's, who cares anymore? Like, it died, it went to the zone, or it gets exiled, then goes to the zone. It's actually changing zones, which is great. Easy to remember, cleans up the game, in my opinion.
Yeah. Also, we've talked about that Banishing Light thing on a weird rules interaction show in the past. Another thing we mentioned on those shows was how things like Decree of Pain count creatures being destroyed and not ones that die. So technically Decree of Pain would count commanders. It doesn't change how Decree of Pain works. It just makes it easier to remember because now things going to the graveyard, like you no longer have to differentiate between Decree of Pain working with commanders and other things that didn't in the past work with commanders. They're all just the same. So like we wouldn't, if we did that show now, we wouldn't even mention the Decree of Pain thing because it just works as you assumed it worked. So yeah, it's going to make a little bit of a difference to the game, but overall, are you glad to see this change or no?
I am. I may not have been politicking as hard as some other content creators that we may know for this rule change, but I'm happy to see it arrive to the game. I don't think it's going to change anything in my personal experience and what I'm looking forward for out of a game of Commander. It gives, the people that wanted it something to say, hey, cool, my Commander really works now.
Yeah.
Which is cool. I want people to have fun and be able to use the cards to their fullest potential. So I'm happy with it. It'll be interesting to see, you kind of mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Kamigawa Dragons, if this rule change does result in any bans in the future just because of poor gameplay experiences or something like that.
Yeah. And when I said that, I was kind of devil's advocate. I don't really think that it's going to, but I wanted to note Kukushka once upon a time was a problem, and this makes it that much better. So I don't think it's still going to be an issue, but who knows? Yeah, I think this is largely a positive change. It made a couple more commanders even more viable. It made a couple ones that were kind of middle of the road slightly better. It made things easier on people keeping track of their rules. I think that's good. It made things more consistent. I think that's good. So when you can make a change that just winds up kind of making the game as a whole better, I think that's probably to everyone's benefit.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for this week's episode. We will be back. I think we have a Thursday show coming this week, don't we?
We do have a Thursday show this week.
All right. Hopefully the next couple weeks. So we'll be back on Thursday with another episode of Commander Central. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR Central _Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod. Until next Thursday, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.